There's something strange, even poetic, about the way the world treats slow starters. But we overlook them, we doubt them, we label them as late bloomers, underachievers, or worse, failures in motion. In a culture obsessed with speed, we've convinced ourselves that if you haven't figured it out by 20, 30, or even 40, you probably never will. But what if that assumption is not just wrong, but catastrophically misleading? What if the very people who struggle to gain momentum at the beginning are the ones most destined for greatness in the end? Napoleon Hill, in his timeless reflections on success and human potential, hinted at this truth again and again, that the seeds of greatness often lie dormant beneath the surface, that are hidden by delay, obscured by frustration, but when they finally grow they erupt with force, clarity, and power that early success could never sustain. So in this video we're going to explore a radical idea that slow starters aren't just late, they're loading, and once they're ready, they move with the kind of strength that only comes from depth, not speed. Let's get real. We've all felt behind at some point. But maybe you're watching this right now because somewhere deep inside, you're asking yourself why it's taking you so long to find your purpose, to build your dream, and to get your shot. Meanwhile, everywhere you look, people seem to be sprinting ahead. Viral success stories, teenage millionaires, 25-year-old CEOs, all reminding you in quiet, painful ways that you're not moving fast enough. But here's the philosophical dilemma. Is success really about how fast you start, or is that just the illusion of momentum? Speed gets attention. Depth builds empires. Napoleon Hill believed that desire backed by faith was the starting point of all achievement. But the desire he described wasn't a superficial craving, it was something that simmered, something that matured over time. And often, that kind of desire doesn't show up in your teens or early 20s. It comes after failure, after rejection, after the world told you no so many times that you decided to carve your own yes.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
Here's what most people never understand about slow starters. We're not slow because we're lazy or incapable, we're slow because we're processing. We're observing, absorbing, analyzing. We're asking deeper questions. We're not content to just do what everyone else is doing, we want to know why we're doing it. And that kind of thinking takes time. It doesn't show immediate results, but it builds something far more powerful than quick wins. It builds foundation. And foundation is what holds up massive structures. The taller the building, the deeper the base must go. So what if your delay isn't a setback? What if it's structural? What if life is digging your foundation so deep because the tower you're meant to build is unlike anything the world has seen yet? Think about this. How many people peak early only to burn out by 30? How many viral stars disappear in silence after the spotlight fades? Starting fast is not the same as finishing strong. And in fact, the people who start fast often do so because they're chasing external validation, not internal alignment. They sprint because they fear stillness. They build fast because they're terrified of being behind. But if you've been slow to start, it probably means you're building something real. You're not trying to impress, you're trying to understand. And once you do, once that understanding clicks, your actions will have weight. But you'll move with intention. You won't just be busy, you'll be effective. And that's a kind of power that early success can't fabricate. I want to ask you something personal. And I want you to sit with it for a moment. What if your slowness is your superpower? What if the very thing you've been ashamed of, your delays, your doubts, your detours, is actually the training ground for the kind of finish that breaks records, not just in the world, but in the soul? Napoleon Hill wrote that every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. But seeds don't bloom instantly. They break in silence, in darkness, underground. And that breaking, those years of confusion, of wandering, that's not failure. That's preparation. That's you becoming ready. So the next time you feel behind, I want you to remember this: time is not your enemy. Comparison is. The race you're running isn't theirs, it's yours. And you're not late. You're just arriving. Slowly, slowly, powerfully, unstoppably. Because when slow starters finally start, they're not just moving, they're mobilizing. And the finish line? It doesn't stand a chance. The momentum of meaning, how late progress builds unshakable purpose that early success can't imitate. There's a strange kind of magic that happens when you've been hungry for a long time. Not the kind of hunger that comes from envy or ego or watching others win while you wait. I mean the deeper hunger, the kind that forms in your bones when you've been quietly fighting battles no one sees, when you've been building without applause, when you've been losing more often than winning, yet still show up to the fight. Oh, that kind of hunger becomes a force. It transforms into purpose. And purpose, unlike hype, doesn't fade. That's the hidden advantage of slow starters. We don't just want to succeed, we need to. Not for the spotlight, but for something much bigger. And that's why when we finally move, the momentum we build is unstoppable. Because it's not rooted in chance. It's rooted in meaning. When you start late, you don't have the luxury of reckless ambition. But you don't have time to chase every shiny object. You're forced to ask better questions, questions like what actually matters to me? And what will fulfill me long after the crowd is gone? Early success often blinds people to these questions. They win too soon, and so they build on weak motivations, approval, status, money. But those things are fragile. The first storm, an algorithm change, a failed launch, a scandal, and they crumble. But when you've been slow to rise, you've had time to test your convictions. You've had to work in silence, to build without feedback, to move without guarantees. And that process creates a kind of internal steel. You don't just have a goal, you have a why. And that why becomes your engine. This is what Napoleon Hill meant when he emphasized definiteness of purpose. But it's not about being rigid, it's about being anchored. It's about knowing that the thing you're building isn't just for applause, but for alignment. And here's the most profound part: when you act from alignment, you don't burn out the same way others do. You're not chasing dopamine, you're channeling destiny. You're not driven by fear of being left behind, you're pulled forward by a vision that's bigger than yourself. And that kind of vision, it moves mountains, it outlasts trends, it survives failure, it grows through pressure. Look at the people who changed the world. Many of them didn't find their stride until midlife or later. Colonel Sanders was 65 when he franchised KFC, but Vera Wang didn't design her first dress until she was 40. Stan Lee didn't create his first superhero until he was almost 39. But these weren't just late bloomers, they were deep bloomers. But their work had weight. Their actions had history behind them. and that history gave them clarity. They weren't guessing, they were delivering on years of study, struggle, and spiritual refinement. So let me ask you something dangerous. What if your delays are actually your advantage? What if your late start is your greatest asset because it forces you to build not fast, but true? Because speed without substance is noise. But meaning is momentum that compounds. It's why once you finally start doing what you were meant to do, you move faster than anyone expects. Not because you're rushing, but because every step is aligned. And alignment is the most efficient force in the universe. I've seen this in real life. People who spent a decade feeling lost suddenly find their calling and leapfrog everyone. Not through luck, but through readiness. They weren't stuck, they were seasoning. And when their time came, they didn't hesitate. They didn't doubt. They simply executed. Because when purpose finally meets preparation, the result is undeniable. It's not flashy, it's foundational. And it shakes the world in quiet, powerful ways. So if you're watching this and you feel like you're behind, I need you to hear something clearly. You are not behind. You are becoming. Every slow step, every quiet failure, every lonely hour, it's all working for you. It's not wasted, it's weaving. You're not being punished, you're being prepared. And when you finally launch, you won't need to scream. You'll just move, and the world will feel it. The unseen advantage, why the quiet years are the training ground for unbreakable finishers. There is a hidden realm of success that almost no one talks about, because it's invisible until it isn't. It's the realm where nothing seems to be happening, where you're grinding in silence, failing in obscurity, and doubting in solitude. These are the quiet years. Not glamorous, not shareable. The years when every step feels small, every effort seems ignored, and every dream looks absurd. But here's the paradox. It's in these years that the most important transformation happens, not in skill, but in character. Not in progress, but in perspective. And what the world calls slow is often just the deep shaping of a person who cannot be broken later. Napoleon Hill called it the testing period, where life asks you, do you really want this? Are you willing to become the person who can carry the weight of this dream? Most people tap out, but the ones who don't, those are the ones who finish stronger than anyone expects. These quiet years give you something that fast starters rarely develop, resilience born from reality. When you've had to keep going without validation, when you've had to show up without applause, when you've had to pick yourself up from failure after failure, you stop being driven by emotion and start being driven by conviction. You stop depending on motivation and start living from discipline. You stop chasing moments and start mastering momentum. That's the unseen advantage. While others burn bright and fast, you learn how to burn steady. You figure out how to fuel yourself not with praise, but with purpose. Not with hype, but with habit. Let me ask you something that might hurt a little. What have you learned in your quiet years that no one else sees? Because I guarantee, if you look closely, those years taught you things no shortcut ever could. How to keep your word to yourself when no one is watching. How to fall in love with the process when the results are invisible. How to rebuild your self-worth without needing permission. These are not just valuable, they're unbreakable. And when life inevitably shakes you, and it will, you'll be able to stand while others collapse. Not because you're lucky, but because you've been through the fire and you came out forged, not burnt. There's a profound wisdom in this that even the greatest minds have echoed. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That's what the quiet years do. Every obstacle becomes a teacher. Every delay becomes a lesson. Every failure becomes a forge. And the result? Strength. Not the kind you post about, but the kind you embody. Quiet years don't just teach you how to succeed, they teach you how to carry success once it arrives. Because here's the truth, getting to the top is one thing. Staying there without losing your soul, that's something only the slow, steady, and deeply prepared can do. And think about this: when you build in silence, you're also protected from premature exposure. But the world can be brutal to those who rise before they're ready. Fame, attention, opportunity, they're not blessings if they come too soon. They can crush you under the weight of expectation. But if you build slowly, you build stability. You build roots. So when the wind comes, and it always comes, you're not shaken. You're anchored. So I want you to ask yourself, are you frustrated by your slow progress, or are you secretly being fortified for something massive? Because if you could see what's being built inside you during these years, you'd stop cursing the silence and start respecting it. You'd understand that silence is not absence, it's construction. But it's the pause before the breakthrough. It's the inhale before the roar. That's why, when slow starters finally break through, they don't just influence, they transform. They don't just finish strong, they finish right. Their victories are clean, their character is tested, and their impact is sustainable. Because they've already done the hard work when no one was watching. And now, when everyone's watching, they don't have to prove anything, they just be. And the final surge, why those who start late often finish with the greatest legacy. There's a moment often invisible to the world, but unmistakable to the soul, when everything you've endured, every quiet year, every unnoticed effort, every private breakdown, it suddenly aligns. It's not loud. It's not cinematic. But it's real. You wake up differently. And you move with intention. The hesitation is gone, not because you're fearless, but because you've faced every fear in the dark. And now, you're not just ready to finish, you're ready to last. That's the final surge. The moment late starters step into their full momentum. But not with noise, but with weight. Because when you've built depth, meaning, and resilience, there's nothing shallow about your rise. You don't just win, you outlast. You don't just influence, you imprint. This is what Napoleon Hill pointed to all along, that success is not a race to the top, but a becoming. And those who take the longest to become often leave the deepest marks. Here's the truth no one tells you. Most people never finish anything meaningful. They quit when the initial thrill fades, when the applause dies down, when the path no longer feels shiny. But slow starters, we've already been through that desert. We know how to walk without water. We've learned how to find fuel in places others overlook: discipline, faith, vision. So when we finally reach the phase of execution, we're not distracted by the noise. We're focused. We're dangerous because we're not driven by external rewards, we're driven by internal necessity. We don't just want to finish, we must. Not for ego, but for destiny. Because we know what it's like to live without expression, to carry a gift that hasn't yet found its form. And when that gift finally finds its shape, nothing can stop it. Not critics, not setbacks, not time. And here's where it gets even more mind-shifting. The late starters often become the greatest finishers because they're not just building success, they're building legacy. Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about leaving behind something that speaks when you're no longer in the room, something that echoes, something that transforms. And legacy can't be built overnight. It's not a product of speed. It's the result of depth-time alignment. That's why people who start late often finish with more wisdom, more clarity, more impact. They've lived, they've failed, they've refined. And by the time they arrive, they don't need to prove anything, they need to give something. So let me ask you the final question, the one that will haunt or empower every minute you spend from this moment forward. Are you building for attention? Or are you building for eternity? Are you racing to be noticed? Or are you anchoring something that will outlive you? Because if you're a slow starter, you already have what most people don't. The time gap that allows for reflection, the resistance that builds character, even the delay that teaches patience. And if you use those wisely, if you stop comparing and start compounding, you will finish with a gravity that others can't replicate. You won't just be successful, you'll be essential. Not just seen but felt. In the end, greatness isn't about how early you start. It's about how deeply you finish. And the slowest starters, those who stayed when no one watched, who built when no one clapped, who believed when no one else did, they are the ones who rise with a force that doesn't fade. They don't explode, they endure, because their rise isn't built on hype. It's built on truth.